And it is 3:15 Eastern Time, 2:15 Central Time, and so on and so on. So we will go ahead and get started. It is my great pleasure today to introduce the team from Nebraska that will be talking about pandemic PODS and people be positive, be proactive, be a partner. Woo, that's a mouthful. And so the Nebraska team that will be presenting today is our friend Ashley Mueller, MS, the State Nebraska Extension Disaster Coordinator, Melanie Thompson, MS, Elkhorn Valley Health Department Disaster Coordinator, and Kim Bearnes, MS, Stanton County Extension Educator. They came together last fall focusing on the possibilities of future disaster events and opportunities for recovery. They have worked together on many different disasters these last 5 years, including flooding and tornado events in Northeast Nebraska. Their topic today is pandemic PODS and people being positive, being proactive, and being a partner. So I will turn it over to them.
Sounds good. I'm just going to pull up our slide set here. One moment.
I went to the house. I slipped.
All right, so I hope everyone can see the first slide we've got here. So I am Ashley Mueller, and I have the privilege of serving as Nebraska Extension's point of contact to Eden. And I'm really excited to be here with a familiar face for many of you. So Kim has attended several past annual meetings, and so she's no stranger to this group and a really great friend and colleague. And then really excited to introduce you all to a wonderful partner that we've been working with for the past few years, and almost seems to have a crystal ball when she approached us with this partnership idea, oh gosh, about a year ago. So today we'll share with you about our project and in particular about PODS, and I'll let Melanie talk more about that specifically. But we have a few highlighted things that we wanted to talk about. You know, one of the best things about Eden is the network and the, relational element to what we do and how we work together. And so presenting this or sharing our project virtually is different, but we certainly, when we were planning for this, wanted to make it so that we were facilitating engagement. We've got some kind of these big themes that we will be talking about, the kind of the history or how we got to where we are with our project, and then some few things that we've been learning and doing along the way, as well as next steps. But we just encourage you all, as you have questions, to post those in the chat box. We'll be monitoring that, or unmute yourself and ask it, because we want to ensure that you get your questions answered or your ideas shared. So with that, I'm going to actually kick it over to Melanie first, if she doesn't mind, to share how this project came to be, and hopefully you all can see here why I said that she may have had a crystal ball that she was looking into.
So local health departments in Nebraska and actually across the United States for many, many years have been tasked by the federal government to make sure that we have the ability to dispense medication to all of the people in our health jurisdictions in case of an emergency. So we generally plan for things like terrorism events. I mean, that's our bread and butter. We always exercise what to do if there's an anthrax attack. Anthrax is our favorite bacteria, apparently. And but you can take what you learn about dealing with anthrax and you can modify it a little bit. So in 2009, we had H1N1 in the United States, and in Nebraska, our health district in Northeast Nebraska was the first one to actually get a case of H1N1. And so we were able to adapt our plans for anthrax and terrorist attacks and turn those into viable options to get vaccines out to the public. Because of all of this planning, we are forever working with different partners on how are you what is this going to look like? How are you going to get the medication out there? So over the years, we have two different models that we follow. One is called an open point of dispensing, or an open pod, and one is called a closed pod. So a closed pod would be a population of people who are able to get the medications and they need them themselves, and they can dispense them to their own population, and you really don't have to go out into the public. So the example for that would be a nursing home. They're just, you know, that population right there. It would be very difficult for them to go out to an open pod, which is for the rest of the public. It would be hard for them to get out there and get their medication. So we have plans and agreements in place that they would be able to give the medications to themselves. But the biggest thing that we worry about is, how are we going to get this out to the general population? You know, Joe Public out on the street, how are they going to get the medication that is given to us? You know, then it's our job, once we get it, to make sure it gets to Joe Public. So these open pods are generally, if you're thinking about a pod, you're thinking about a large open space that people can go into, go out of. You know, there's always parking issues, those kind of things. So we generally look at gymnasiums, community centers, those kind of things. We have open pods in 3 out of the 4 counties in our health district. Kim is the extension educator in Stanton County, and that is actually one of the counties that we do not have an open point of dispensing. We would just put out the message that people in Stanton County would have to go to one of the neighboring counties to get their medications. So I was actually going to work on the agreement with one of the schools in Burt County, which is to our east. And while there, I was talking with the school, and they were a little bit reluctant, you know, as we were talking about issues that could crop up. And this is back in the fall of last year. As we were talking about things that could crop up, you know, it was like, well, you know, if we're having the public come into the gymnasium and it's the middle of March, we're going to be having the public mixing with the kids. And now you have, you know, what about people who are, I don't know, that have been convicted of a sex crime? You know, how do you screen people as they come through a gymnasium? And the truth is that would be a very difficult situation to allow somebody to come into. And so, you know, we were grappling with those things anyway. And then we were also grappling with, you know, if school's in session, it's going to absolutely disrupt school anyway. You know, you're going to probably have to close down for a day or two. So as I was driving out of town, I looked over and there was the fairgrounds, and I thought, why are we not using fairgrounds? You guys have these large open spaces. You're used to large crowds. You have this ability to handle those kind of situations, the kind of situations that we wrestle with all of the time. So when I got back to the office, I think I sent an email to Ashley and maybe Kim. I think I sent it to Ashley, and Ashley said, oh, you have to involve Kim. And I said, yes, I do, because she could be our model, since we don't even have a point of dispensing in their county. So that's when we started working on this. Kim, did you want to jump in and talk about where it went from there?
Sure. So this had been about a year ago, and we hadn't even heard the word COVID, didn't know what it was. And we were just talking about what ifs. And we've got a very good working relationship between the 3 of us in our area with past disaster events that we worked in. And so what Melanie didn't tell you is she's also a Fair Board member in one of those counties also. So she understands exactly how fairs are run and what it takes to be on a fair board, and the idiosyncrasies and hoops, whatever that needs to be navigated. And so we had a meeting and we sit down, we talked about a lot of what ifs and how we could turn this around. Never knowing what we were walking into when we got to the end of the month. So if you can imagine, and we always talk about a visual picture, if you'll visualize a three-legged stool, is what we were talking about. So to put together a program like this that would work, Extension would be one leg, the Fairboard Association or Fairboard group in that county might be another leg, and the Department of Health. So across the state, and correct me if I'm wrong, Melanie, but I was thinking we had 18 groups, and they're in multi-county units. And so we would put together this concept using this three-legged approach where we all worked together and everyone participated and brought a certain idea to a certain expertise, if you will, to the concept, to the program, to the event. And we sit down and kind of brainstorm some ideas, and my Fair Board president happens to be the president of the Fairboard Managers Association for the state. So sometimes you get lucky on who you know, or and all three of us are fairly very extroverted people. So if we don't know who you are, we will find out and make quick friends of you. But anyway, I talked to Tom and I said, let's roll this idea out if we can with the Fairboard Managers Association and see if they would be interested in doing something like this. Now, for those of you that know Extension, before we made that jump, we had to make sure it was okay with our management, as well as I'm sure Melanie checked with hers. And so, you need to figure out what your chain of command is in your area and make sure that you dot all those I's and cross those T's to make sure that you've got permission. So we went to our dean and director, Chuck Hibbert, at the time. He was excited about the program. He wanted to make sure Ashley was on. And of course, Ashley was already, part of this when we visited. So we put together a program and went to the state association in January and rolled this out to, I don't know how many people were there, Melanie, but it was full, 500 at least people. And presented this concept to them. And if you will remember back in January, we were just starting to get information on the national news about this coronavirus. And so we weren't sure how serious it was going to be. Everybody's kind of paying attention, and Melanie and I kind of laughed about, well, we're all kind of on the front of this. Maybe this is something we could use, not thinking that it was going to get this serious. But Melanie started out with her presentation. And Melanie, I have to tell them about Dr. Ed. Remember Ed? So,
Oh, yes, I do.
So a Dr. Ed, who was a part of the Omaha group, Fairboard group, stood up in the middle of this meeting after we were done presenting our idea and said, and you could have heard a pin drop when he was done, said, "This is the best idea I've heard since they invented polio vaccine in the 60s. And then he proceeded to say that they'd been working he works at the Med Center in Omaha. They'd been working for a long time trying to figure out what would be the answer if they had to do a mass inoculation to the population, how that would look, who would they bring, what the partners, how could they organize it." And he said, in less than 15 minutes, you guys stood up there and told us the answer in a low cost, very efficient, effective way. And it was just one of those moments you will always remember. It's like, wow, maybe we do have a really good idea. So that's what kind of led us to this, down this road. And so we've been working together to do get the event together and work on some ideas to roll this out just in case we did. Well, then by March, it reared its ugly head and everybody was sent home, and we've all been working, and Melanie has worked, I don't know how many days you've worked, and I'm guessing very few days off, but she's been right in the middle of this pandemic for our area, tracking and working on this COVID deal. So we wanted to present our idea to you, and I don't know if your state has a plan or if Extension is part of it, but we are starting to proceed a little bit about how we do that. Now I'm going to pass the hat to Ashley and ask Ashley to talk a little bit about who we share it with, and maybe Jean Ann Fisher, who's not a part of this group, but what she does for the group and who we might bring on as additional partners, and how that might work on the state level.
Yeah, so, we had some plans too after the Fair Managers Association, so we can talk about what our rollout plan will be, but I can share from an extension standpoint. So my role is a statewide disaster education coordinator. Disaster education isn't a program area, but it supports all of our program areas. And so part of my job is to ensure that we're making connections with our administrators that are serving and leading their specific programs. And so one of the conversations that Kim and I had early on was making sure that our human sciences program leader was aware of what we were doing. This is a very new concept. I mean, this health space, we're seeing a lot of good work in Extension in the mental health and wellness arena, but this was a little bit different, or a lot different than that. And so wanted to ensure that Jean Ann Fisher was aware of what we were doing in that regard. And of course, Kim said, our former dean and director, Chuck Hibbard. And so what I get to do is then ensure we've got these connections made and we're maintaining communication, that kind of situational awareness. And so as we're thinking about on our extension side in Nebraska, in terms of rolling this out, is what do we need to be thinking about to ready our colleagues? Because there's been this conversation at the state level, right, with the Fair Managers Association. And so those folks, right, been dispersed. They went all back to their home communities, their home counties, and they may be starting to have some of these conversations as well. And they may be here soon when, this vaccine or vaccines become, more readily available. And so what do we need to be thinking about in terms of getting them ready, getting them up to speed, and helping our own folks understand, right, this partnership. I've been really excited to see many of our extension folks all across the state engaging with their local public health departments throughout this pandemic. We actually did an inventory in late March, early April to determine our points of contact within Nebraska Extension to their local health department. So we feel like we've set the ground, or the stage for that. But of course, right now we need to foster this process a little bit more and determine how we educate, how we help folks have that conversation, approach that partnership, if and when that time is ready for all of us. So I don't know, Kim, if that is helpful in terms of kind of where we are, I guess.
Right. One thing that we did, and I don't know what the other models for the other state were, but we have an extension educator per Department of Health groupings that is a point of contact, if you will, so that Melanie runs ours, and we have 4 counties that we cover. And so I would make sure that all the counties have what they need, know what they might need, answer the questions or redirect and help them along with some of those ideas. So it identifies someone from Extension to be in direct contact with that, which really helps. We've all got our plates so full, and I think that might be something that you would want to consider. And we talked about that the other day of making sure that that next, if you will, subgroup is on board with all of this information. In the end, what we want to do is provide a creative model of something that will work for all of the different areas, all the different departments. We know that everybody's going to morph it into something that works for them the best. But if we can have some type of model for people to follow along, I think that would be very helpful to everybody. And then, you know, we even talked about, you know, putting a template together and they fill in the blanks, if you will, something that's fairly easy. But Melanie, you talked about some of the directives that when the CDC rolls out information or rolls out medication, how that might happen and the turnaround time. I thought that was interesting. And do you want to talk a little bit about that right now?
Sure. I think one of the things that, you know, when we're talking, making a template and stuff, everybody needs to realize that your local health department has thousands and thousands and probably thousands of pages of plans that they have worked on for 20 years or more. Nebraska is pretty new to the health department model. And so, you know, we've been doing this for 20 years. There's some that have probably been doing this for 100 years. So we all have these templates that we've worked on, that we've, as Kim was saying, you know, we've morphed and turned into what works for us. So the model that we're actually looking at is how to put this into a fairground. And we actually, honestly, from the health department standpoint in Nebraska, we had a situation where the National Guard came in during COVID here, and they were doing testing of people, and it was free, but we needed to have a location. And so in 2 of the 4 counties, I was like, well, let's do this at the fairgrounds. You know, let's kind of like see what this looks like. So 2 of our 4 counties have already kind of done a little bit to see what that would look like. And what we found, and this is going to be especially important during a vaccination, is that we can do a drive-through model where the people don't even get out of their vehicles. And this is really important when you have an infectious disease that can be transferred from person to person. The less amount of time people spend mixing together, the less likely it is that they're gonna spread something that they're not supposed to other people. And so your buildings on your fairgrounds, a lot of them, not a lot of them, but you have some that have doors that people can just drive right through, or they drive in and make a quick little turn and then they're out the door. They never have to get out of their vehicles. And that's those were the buildings that we used with the National Guard during doing those tests, and it worked very, very slick. But you know, the National Guard was there. The National Guard is used to, you know, they bring in this whole team. They go in, they set it up, they do it, you know. And so, but it really gave us an idea from the health department standpoint about what that might look like. But also, so the meat and potatoes of these plans are already done. It's all of the other things that we need to put together and turn it into a template that we can just drop into a county and say, okay, this is the general things that you need. These are the checklists that you're going to need. One of the things, even though we have all of these plans, especially in rural areas, we have a problem with making sure that we have enough people to do this kind of a scenario. When you're giving vaccinations, you can't just have any Tom, Dick, or Harry giving a shot. You need to have somebody who is licensed to give the vaccination in the state. So we can use nurses, doctors, pharmacists. Actually, we can use veterinarians. So we need those people, but they're a small contingent of the team that we need. We need to have people directing traffic, answering questions, helping people with their paperwork. We need people entering the information. So there are a lot of moving parts to this, and we actually don't have a lot of people who are on our volunteer list. I think I have 165 people on my personal volunteer list in the health department. When I do a call down, a random call down, I will usually get 30 people or so who will say, yes, I could respond at this time. but 30 people is not enough to actually run a pod. I would probably need about double that. So you guys have access to adult volunteers, youth volunteers. These are things that you can put together that the youth could even use this as a project. You know, there are a lot of opportunities for your 4-Hers to be able to, you know, work with their health department and put this together. Because right now, our health department, we are so taxed. This summer, we hired like 4 or 5 high school students, 3 college students, and then 1 who is a paraprofessional, just to come in and help us kind of, you know, get some of this together. And with PODS, you know, we would love to have the help of volunteers to get these off the ground, because we do not have time to do this ourselves. So so you guys have access to those volunteers, to skilled people who can actually help us, who know their way around the property that you're going to be operating. You have access to equipment. You know, we might say, oh, actually, you know what, we need 8 tables and 16 chairs. You're going to go, okay, here you go. And that makes our lives a whole lot easier, because that is something that, you know, some health departments might have it, some health departments might not. But between your assets and our assets, we could make a really nicely operating pod. And that's an important thing. So I want to talk about, and we're going to segue now into getting the medication. So Kim referenced that the Strategic National Stockpile is where we would normally get medication and supplies from. This is a federal asset. It is, it's just a whole bunch of supplies that the federal government has purchased. Sometimes it's just agreements to purchase. It not only includes medication, it includes durable medical equipment. It includes like PPE, personal protective equipment, gloves, those kind of things. And these are stored in locations throughout the United States. If we were to have an anthrax event, and again, like I said, we like anthrax in public health. So if we were to get a phone call saying that, that we'd had an anthrax event, I would call the emergency manager of my county. He would then call the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency. NEMA calls the CDC and says, hey, we're going to need the Strategic National Stockpile. So from the point that I made that initial call, everything that we would need to treat all of the residents in the affected area would be on my doorstep within 12 hours from my initial call. And they tell us that we need to be ready in 4 hours. The same thing is going to kind of happen with the COVID vaccines. Right now, there are 3 very viable vaccines, and it looks like there's a 4th one that came, I think, this morning. It's now in phase 3 of the trials. So the federal government is hedging their bets, and they have started manufacturing these vaccines. It appears that probably the most viable one is going to be, it's called ultra cold. It has to be stored from -60 to -80 degrees. And then it's set out and thawed before we can inject it into people. People that are way smarter than me and get paid a whole lot more than me are working on how that is exactly going to work. Now, if this comes out in January or February and March, or January or February or March in Nebraska, we might be good, because sometimes it feels about that cold. But they do have plans for using dry ice, you know, and the storage containers are supposed to last for a week or whatever. But those kind of things, that kind of planning is happening at a level above us, above Extension. It's happening at the federal level. It will be given to the state. By the time it gets down to us, you know, we'll have a general idea about that, what that's going to look like. The one thing we don't know yet is exactly how they're going to roll out those vaccines. We do know that it's going to come in phases. Phase 1, we will probably be doing vulnerable populations. So we'll be looking at nursing homes, obviously, for obvious reasons. I know here in Nebraska, I think about 46% of the deaths that we've had associated with COVID have come from nursing homes. So, and you know, they're not that much of a population overall. So I think it's like, what, 3% of the population is in a nursing home in Nebraska, and 46% of the deaths of COVID are from people in nursing homes. So we know that they're a vulnerable population. They would likely open that up to older people with comorbidities, so people who might have like diabetes or a lung transplant, something like that. In those situations, we would probably not even get to the point that we need to open up a fairground pod. We would probably go down to our local senior center, something like that, where people who they're used to going there. It's easy for them, you know, they're used to it. It's in phase 2 and maybe phase 3 when it really gets opened up to the general population, and we will get a phone call and say, hey, on Thursday you're going to get 5,000 vaccines, and you have a day or two to get them out to the population. That is kind of what it looks like that this is going to be, because they're not going to be able to manufacture, and then we get 26 million vaccines all at once. It's a process. They make so many a day because that's all the capacity that they have. And so when it comes time for that, it appears that we will get notified that, hey, you know, next week or in 3 days, you're going to get this many vaccines. So because even the federal government doesn't exactly know what this is going to look like, the state still doesn't know, we need to be prepared and have all of our agreements in place. We need to have had even minimal training. We have a group working on an online training, like maybe 20 minutes, so people would at least understand what this would look like. The thing is that we can't finish that training because frankly, we don't know what it looks like yet. We don't know, you know, are we going to be entering people's information into an online portal? Are we going to need people to fill out papers, or are they going to be able to register everything online? We don't know that yet. And so as soon as we do know, we'll be able to put those plans together and make an online training. And it kind of sounds like that's kind of what all of the states, you know, every state is working on their own little thing, but it sounds like that nationwide is what is happening. So we don't have a lot of the black and white details about what COVID vaccine rollout is going to look like, but we expect that phase 1 that I was talking about with the vulnerable populations, the earliest it's going to happen is November, because even though they want to get this vaccine out, they will not roll it out until it is safe, until you know, the studies have proven that there are not issues, or there are very few issues with it. So there is a time factor, you know, this is not going to happen overnight as much as we wish that it would, so that we could all get back to normal. I would expect that the earliest that we would see the phase 3 would probably be end of February, maybe the first part of March, honestly, before we really start seeing a volume of effective vaccine rollout to the public. So I think that's probably a very reasonable time frame. You know, if we can, the sooner we can get this together, the sooner we can, you know, start talking with people and stuff. But just realize that we need to make sure that when we're talking with people, that everybody is flexible. It's not an easy thing to do in a disaster. You want it to be black and white. You want the guidance. You want everything, but it does not roll out that way, as we are learning. So I'll pass it back to one of you guys.
Well, I was gonna say, so Melanie and Kim, I think that's a great kind of segue to talk about the logistics, right? So a couple of questions have come in about the engagement with county commissioners. And, you know, I know, Melanie, you talked about the process that it would look like, right? You would call your local emergency manager, who would then, right, initiate that, for example, to initiate the SNS. But what conversations have been had with your local commissioners, or what is the consensus that you're hearing, I guess, from this group? Because sometimes there can be some resistance with these folks.
Right. So at least in Nebraska, every county has their own local emergency operations plan. So it's called a LEOP, and it comes from the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency, or NEMA. And it's a template, and they just, they drop their information into it. In Nebraska, the part of the LEOP called Annex G that has to do with medication dispensing. And it specifically states that, the health department is the lead agency, whatever. And then it's very vague about the PODS themselves. However, I think that most commissioners in most counties want to keep their economies running. And to do that, we are going to have to vaccinate people. Even people who might be a little reluctant for vaccines are going to have to consider, how are we going to get this back together? How are we going to put our whole lives back together after this? So we need a viable vaccine, and we need an effective treatment. And to do that, we're going to need a cooperation from the whole community. And I think that so far, our emergency managers, if I had to say where the pushback we're getting from emergency managers is happening, is because they would really like to know the names and addresses of every single person who is positive in their county. This is HIPAA protected information, and I can give you a story about why it is. Emergency managers and fire department chiefs, I've gotten a number of phone calls from them early on in this. They wanted to know the names and addresses of these people so that they could go and put a red biohazard bag on the porch, so that they could put a quarantine note on the door. So they were going back to the days past, like when my grandmother, when there was polio in their town, that's what they did. They put a quarantine notice on the doors of the houses. And that is not the world that we live in anymore. And there was, especially at the beginning, I don't think that we have it as much now, but there was kind of a stigma attached to the people who were coming down with COVID to begin with. Especially here, we saw an outbreak in a packing plant, in a meat packing plant. The vast majority of the people there are immigrants, or and especially the Hispanic population. We ran into that where that was really the population that was being affected during that time. And you could hear the grumblings at the coffee shop, and some of my husband's friends and stuff. There were some disparaging remarks, and so to make sure that didn't happen, that is the reason why HIPAA was invented in the first place. Because especially in this situation, we did not need to have people going out and throwing people out in the street because they got COVID. They didn't do anything wrong except for, mix with people when COVID, to get COVID. I mean, you can get this because it's airborne, just for the simple fact that you're breathing, you become susceptible to contracting COVID. So we ended up dealing with the emergency managers that way by signing an agreement with the emergency dispatch. Dispatch now gets a list of names and addresses. They have to purge the person's name after 3 weeks on that list, so that if they were to get a call, whether from police or EMS, to that address, they would know that they had to take special precautions. EMS should automatically be doing that anyway. It's just that sometimes, they might get a little bit lax on that. But police were a bigger concern for us if there was a domestic dispute or something at one of those addresses. But county commissioners, for the most part, have been very supportive. The model that we have at our health department, we have one county commissioner from each of our counties on our own health board. And so then they become our liaisons to the rest of the commissioners. They've been very supportive. As you all know, this COVID is a very political situation. So it was very important for us to make sure that we're talking to those commissioners as well. And yeah, I think that you might get pushback, but if they push back too hard, it's not the end of the world. The health department, I'm sure, has other agreements. It's just that when we were looking at where would be a great place to have this, boy, fairgrounds for me far outweigh having it in a school. So that probably over answers that question about county commissioners, but
Well, no, that's great, Melanie. Thank you. So we had another question come through about, and Kim, I'm going to kick this over to you with your youth development focus. And this ties into our next steps here in extension. So how do you deal with the liability about using youth, engaging them in this type of activity?
Well, I think the first thing we talked about, and Melanie talked about, this would be a great thing for the older youth to be involved in if they're interested, and we've got a platform for them. But we need to make sure that we've talked to the State Department to make sure that we can use and share that volunteer list, or that we can activate our volunteers and our 4-H youth in that way. So I would advise everybody, and that's a conversation we've been having at the state level, to see if our 4-H youth, and we even talked about FFA also, if 4-H can't doesn't have enough, to make sure that that's covered. Now, as far as the liability of this, and I'm going to throw this quickly back to Mel because we're getting short on time, but can you talk a little bit about the liability issue with having a pod, an emergency pod put together? Who's responsible? Because we did talk about that, and that's important to know.
Yeah, so I put a link in the chat box to the PrEP Act. It's the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. And what this does is that during a declaration, which the COVID situation is under a presidential declaration, it eliminates basically liability, because you're in a situation where you might actually catch COVID from helping in this, but nobody can sue you, nobody can sue the place. If you get hurt because you walk into the space, you're not going to get sued. Now, if there's absolute neglect, then that may be an issue. But the PrEP Act is not the only thing that helps protect against liabilities. There are a number of them, but this is the main one. And it's usually enough to, and that's why schools were able to, we're able to get into schools to do these pods as well. But the PrEP Act is the main one that you can use and you can take and give to commissioners or fair boards, so that they, they can read it for themselves, take it to their lawyers, that kind of thing, just to make sure that it is okay for them to do that.
All right, well, before I kick it over to Carrie, I'm sure she's got one final announcement. I just wanted to share, some tentative next steps, as Kim's kind of alluded to, and Melanie. We've got some work to do on the extension side in terms of seeking some of those permissions, in terms of volunteer lists, right? And then just, again, this communication aspect of making sure that our leadership is informed, and of course, then also building out these specific plans further for when, a pod needs to be opened, that extension is ready to be that kind of supportive a partner. Of course, right, our public health department is the lead agency on that, but being a really great partner and preparing to do that. I did notice we had one question in the chat pods. I'm going to wait on that one. If maybe Melanie and Kim could stay on for just a couple more minutes, but I'll kick it over to Carrie for any final announcements. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, and we can stay on for a couple seconds, but I did want to point, I put the evaluation link in the chat box 3 times. Click on it and help us evaluate for our presenters. And we want to thank them for sharing all this valuable information with us. I know I saved that link to the PrEP site, so thank you all. And you have a 15-minute break before our next set of concurrent sessions. So for those of you who want to stay on to listen for just a second, and then Cheyenne will have to kick us off because the next group will be coming in.
Just one thing, while people are still on, I just wanted to let you know that we've had really great support for our health departments by our governor, and he's worked very closely with them, and let them, I don't know if, Melanie, if the word is lead or organize or coordinate the local efforts quite a bit. I think I visited with folks from other states, and every state runs a different type of hierarchy, whatever. But our local support from the commissioners and on up the line has been exceptional for us here.
Well, and I think it comes back to the disasters are always local. You can have all sorts of, and we've seen this with our tornadoes, we'll have lots of help coming in initially, but they leave. And so then it is up to us to make sure that everything is taken care of. And I think that is why, and the governor realizes that. We actually have phone calls with him twice a week, and where we review the data. There are some things that are taken out of our hands, that the decisions that are made, but for the most part, we at least have input, and our governor has been doing a tremendous job listening to us and looking at the data. So and then it comes, like you were saying, comes back to the locals, and then we just deal with the situation.
So just a reminder, I guess I'm still here. Just as a reminder, if you have questions, our emails are on that screen, initial screen. Feel free to send your questions our way, and if there's more questions, we'll follow up.
I stopped sharing too soon, but I'm sure, will Eden, Cheyenne, Carrie be collecting these PowerPoints to send out, or will they be available?
Yes, and if you want contact information, I know at least Ashley's name in the program. If you click on the link, you will get her email address, and I think Kim as well.
Yep, and we can make connections. So thanks again, all.